Welcome to Cognitive Curves, where we explore the complexities of psychology, culture, and behavior. Have you ever wondered why some marketing campaigns hook you instantly, or why certain people can sway crowds with just a few words? Today, we're uncovering the psychology of persuasion, diving into powerful techniques that shape our decisions, often without us even realizing it. This episode is a collaboration of experts to provide you with a deeper understanding, and the voice you're hearing represents a unified perspective from our team.
Welcome to our deep dive into the psychology of persuasion. Get ready because we're about to uncover the science behind how our thoughts and actions are influenced. So forget those everyday assumptions about just getting what you want. This is about understanding the subtle forces that shape our decisions.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll explore real-world examples from the rise of Amazon to those sneaky sales tactics we all fall for. You know, that feeling of, wait, why did I just buy that? After an online shopping spree. We're going to break down exactly why that happened.
Exactly. We're going to delve into the psychological mechanisms at play. And you'll be surprised at how much of this science is at work in your everyday life.
So to kick things off, we have to talk about the OG influencer expert, Dr. Robert Cialdini, and his book, Influence. He identified 6 key principles of persuasion that are absolutely foundational to understanding how influence works.
Cialdini's work is truly groundbreaking. He spent years studying compliance professionals, salespeople, marketers, negotiators, and he distilled their methods into these 6 universal principles.
And these aren't just abstract concepts. I mean, we see these principles in action every single day. One that really gets me is scarcity. Ever notice how limited time offers make you act impulsively, like you have to buy it now or you'll miss out?
Oh yeah, it's not just you. Research by Wortel and his colleagues back in 1975 found that scarcity actually changes how we value things. Simply because something is harder to get, we suddenly desire it more. It's like our brains are wired to react that way.
Wow, so even if we weren't initially that interested in something, the idea that it might become unavailable makes us want it more.
Precisely. And this principle is used everywhere. Think about those limited edition products or only a few left in stock messages you see online.
Oh, or those flash sales that only last a few hours. They're designed to trigger that sense of urgency and make us act without thinking it through.
Exactly. Incredibly effective. But scarcity is just one of Cialdini's 6 principles. There's also reciprocity, commitment and consistency, social proof, liking, and authority. Each one taps into a different psychological lever that influences our behavior.
Okay, so let's take a closer look at a few of these. Reciprocity, for example. You mentioned earlier how receiving a free gift can make you feel obligated to reciprocate. But how does that actually work in practice?
Well, a classic study by Reagan in 1971 demonstrates this perfectly. Participants who received a small, unexpected gift from a stranger were later much more likely to buy raffle tickets from that same stranger, even if they didn't particularly like the person or want the tickets.
Wow, so it's like that feeling of, I owe you one, really kicks in, even if the initial gesture was small?
Exactly. And this principle is used everywhere, from free samples at the grocery store to complimentary consultations with a salesperson. It's a powerful way to build a sense of obligation and increase the likelihood of compliance.
This makes me think about social proof. It's like that saying, if everyone's jumping off a bridge, would you? It seems like we're hardwired to follow the crowd.
Absolutely. Social proof taps into our desire to conform and our inherent trust in the collective wisdom of others. Think about it. When you're looking for a new restaurant, are you more likely to choose one with a long line out the door or one that's completely empty?
Definitely the one with the line. I figure if everyone else is going there, it must be good.
Right. And online retailers use this all the time. They display messages like 9 out of 10 customers recommend this product, or over 10,000 units sold this week, to trigger our sense of social proof.
So even if we don't consciously realize it, we're constantly being influenced by what others are doing.
Precisely. And that's why understanding these principles is so crucial. It allows us to become more aware of the subtle forces that shape our decisions.
And speaking of influential forces, let's talk about Amazon. I mean, that company is practically a master class in persuasion.
You're absolutely right. Amazon strategically employs almost all of Cialdini's 6 principles to create a seamless and persuasive shopping experience.
Well, for starters, they've mastered the art of scarcity. Think about those lightning deals that disappear in a flash.
They create that sense of urgency and fear of missing out that we were talking about earlier.
And then there are those millions of customer reviews, providing social proof on a massive scale. Even if I'm looking at a product I've never heard of, Seeing those glowing reviews makes me think, well, it can't be that bad if everyone else loves it.
Exactly. They've turned their customers into their most effective salespeople.
And let's not forget their reputation for fast shipping and reliable service. It's like they've established themselves as the authority in online retail.
Precisely. And that authority builds trust and makes us more likely to buy from them. You can see how expertly they've woven these principles into their business model.
It's honestly a little bit brilliant. And I have to admit, I've definitely fallen prey to their tactics more times than I care to admit. One-click ordering is dangerous.
We've all been there. But now that we're aware of these principles, we can be more mindful of their influence on our decisions.
All right. So we've covered some of the key players in the science of persuasion, but what about the different ways we actually process persuasive messages?
That brings us to the elaboration likelihood model, or ELM. This model explains that there are two distinct routes to persuasion: the central route and the peripheral route.
Okay, break it down for us. What's the difference between these two routes?
The central route is when we really put on our thinking caps and are persuaded by strong, well-reasoned arguments. We're actively engaged in critically evaluating the information presented. It's what happens when we're making those big decisions.
So like buying a house or choosing a healthcare plan, you're not going to base those decisions on a catchy slogan. You're going to weigh the pros and cons, do your research, and really think it through.
Exactly. Now, the peripheral route is quite different. Here, we're swayed by surface-level cues, things like the speaker's attractiveness, a catchy jingle, or even just good vibes. We're not really thinking critically about the message itself.
Okay, so it's like when you see a commercial with a celebrity you admire, and you suddenly find yourself wanting the product they're selling, even if you don't really need it.
Precisely. Or when you're scrolling through social media and see a post with a beautiful photo and a catchy caption, and you click like without even really reading the content. It's a much more automatic and less thoughtful process.
I'm starting to realize that I probably operate on the peripheral route more than I'd like to admit. But when does each route work best? When should we be relying on logic and reason? And when can we just go with our gut?
Well, the central route is most effective when we're both motivated and able to think hard about the issue at hand. Like you mentioned, big decisions, things that matter to us, where we have a personal stake in the outcome.
That makes sense. We're more likely to pay attention and really process the information when we feel personally invested.
Exactly. But the peripheral route is more effective when we're distracted, uninterested, or the issue is simple. Think about those impulse buys at the checkout counter. You're not really putting a lot of thought into whether or not you need another pack of gum. You're just swayed by the packaging and the fact that it's right there in front of you.
Okay, so the context really matters. It's not just about the message itself, it's about the mental state of the person receiving that message.
That's a key insight, and it helps us understand why different persuasion tactics work in different situations.
This is giving me a whole new perspective on how I interact with the world. But let's delve into something a little more uncomfortable. Cognitive dissonance.
Cognitive dissonance. This is the fascinating theory developed by Leon Festinger. It describes that uneasy feeling we get when our actions and beliefs clash. It's that internal struggle we experience when we do something we know is wrong or hold contradictory beliefs.
Oh, I definitely know that feeling. Like when I continue to eat junk food even though I know it's terrible for my health, or when I procrastinate on a project even though I know it's going to stress me out later.
Exactly. We all experience cognitive dissonance to some degree. The interesting thing is how this discomfort motivates us to change. We either adjust our behavior to align with our beliefs.
So I finally ditch the junk food and start eating healthy.
Or we rationalize our behavior to make ourselves feel less guilty.
So I tell myself, it's just one bag of chips, it won't kill me. Or I work better under pressure anyway.
Precisely. And understanding cognitive dissonance is crucial because it explains why certain persuasion tactics work so well.
I'm intrigued. How does cognitive dissonance tie into persuasion?
Well, think about it. When someone presents us with information that contradicts our existing beliefs, it creates a sense of dissonance, and we're naturally motivated to reduce that discomfort.
So we might change our beliefs to align with the new information, or we might try to discredit the source of the information to maintain our existing views.
Exactly, and skillful persuaders can leverage this to their advantage. For instance, by presenting compelling evidence that challenges our assumptions. They can create a sense of dissonance that makes us more open to their message.
That's fascinating. So it's not just about delivering a persuasive message. It's about creating the right conditions for that message to be received.
Precisely, and cognitive dissonance plays a key role in creating those conditions.
This is all making me wonder about the specific techniques that persuaders use to get us to change our minds or take action. I'm sure there are some tried and true tactics that we encounter all the time.
You're absolutely right, and we're going to dive into some of those classic persuasion techniques in the next part of our deep dive. Get ready to unpack the foot in the door technique, the door in the face technique, and more.
Can't wait. Stay tuned, everyone. The deep dive continues.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the fascinating world of persuasion.
Yeah, it's amazing how much we uncovered in the last part.
Oh, we've just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
But before we dive into those classic persuasion techniques you mentioned, let's talk about ethical considerations.
Right, because knowing these tactics is one thing, but using them responsibly is another.
Exactly. Persuasion isn't inherently good or bad. It's a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for constructive or destructive purposes.
So it's all about the intention and the skill of the persuader.
Precisely. Ethical persuasion is about influencing others in a way that benefits both parties. It's about open communication, respect, and transparency.
So how can we ensure we're using these techniques ethically? What are some key principles to keep in mind?
Well, first and foremost, it's crucial to be honest and transparent. Don't mislead people or make promises you can't keep. Be upfront about your intentions and the potential outcomes.
So no hidden agendas or manipulating people's emotions for personal gain.
Exactly. Ethical persuasion is about building trust and rapport, not exploiting vulnerabilities.
That makes sense. So honesty and transparency are key. What else should we consider?
Another important principle is respect. Respect your audience's intelligence and autonomy. Don't treat them like they're gullible or easily manipulated.
So even if we're using persuasive techniques, we should always treat the other person as an equal, someone capable of making their own informed decisions.
Precisely. It's about empowering them to make the best choice for themselves, not coercing them into doing what we want.
This all sounds good in theory, but how do we put these principles into practice? What are some concrete steps we can take to become more ethical persuaders?
One practical step is to focus on building genuine relationships. People are more likely to be persuaded by someone they trust and like.
So it's not just about delivering a slick sales pitch. It's about connecting with the other person on a human level.
Exactly. Take the time to listen to their needs, understand their perspectives, and find common ground. Building rapport is essential.
That's a great point. It's not about winning or losing. It's about finding a mutually beneficial solution.
Precisely. And remember, ethical persuasion is a long game. It's about building trust and credibility over time, not just trying to score a quick win.
So no shortcuts or manipulative tactics.
Exactly. Focus on providing value, being authentic, and building strong relationships. That's the foundation of ethical persuasion.
Okay, so we've talked about the ethical framework. Now let's dive into some of those classic persuasion techniques. You mentioned the foot in the door technique earlier. Can you explain how that works?
Sure. The foot in the door technique is based on the principle of commitment and consistency. It starts with a small request, something easy to agree to. Once someone has committed to that small request, they're more likely to agree to a larger request later on.
It's like getting someone to say yes to something small sets the stage for them to say yes to something bigger down the line.
Exactly. A classic study by Friedman and Fraser in 1966 demonstrated this perfectly. They asked homeowners if they would be willing to display a small sign in their window supporting safe driving. A couple of weeks later, they returned and asked those same homeowners if they would be willing to install a large, unsightly billboard in their front yard, also promoting safe driving.
I'm guessing the homeowners who agreed to the small sign were more likely to agree to the billboard as well.
You got it. The homeowners who had already made a small commitment to the cause were much more likely to agree to the larger request, even though it was much more intrusive.
Wow. So even a seemingly insignificant action can have a ripple effect on our future behavior.
Absolutely. And this technique is used everywhere, from marketing to fundraising to even personal relationships.
So for example, a salesperson might start by asking a potential customer a simple question, like, are you interested in saving money? Once the customer says yes, they're more likely to be receptive to the salesperson's pitch.
Exactly. Or a nonprofit organization might ask someone to sign a petition supporting their cause. Later on, they might ask those same people to make a donation. The foot-in-the-door technique can be incredibly effective.
Okay, so what about the opposite approach? You mentioned something called the door-in-the-face technique. How does that work?
The door-in-the-face technique is a bit counterintuitive. It starts with a large, unreasonable request that is almost guaranteed to be rejected. Then the persuader follows up with a smaller, more reasonable request.
So it's like asking for $1 million and then settling for 100.
You got it.
Yeah.
The idea is that the initial rejection makes the smaller request seem more appealing by comparison.
That's interesting. So it's playing on our sense of guilt or obligation. Like, well, I already said no to that big thing, so I should at least agree to the smaller thing.
Precisely. A study by Cialdini in 1975 demonstrated this effect. Researchers asked college students if they would be willing to volunteer 2 hours per week for 2 years at a juvenile detention center.
That's a pretty big ask. I'm guessing most students said no.
You're right. Most students declined. However, when the researchers followed up with a smaller request, asking the students if they would chaperone a group of delinquent youth on a 2-hour trip to the zoo, they were much more likely to agree.
So the contrast between the two requests made the smaller request seem more palatable.
Exactly. And this technique can be surprisingly effective in a variety of situations.
This is all making me wonder about the role of storytelling in persuasion.
Storytelling. It's one of the most powerful tools we have for connecting with others and influencing their beliefs and behaviors.
Oh yeah, there's something about a good story that just draws us in, makes us feel things, empathize with characters, and see the world through a different lens.
Precisely. Stories engage our emotions, bypassing our logical filters and creating a more impactful experience.
So instead of just presenting facts and figures, we can use stories to illustrate our points, make them more relatable, and create a lasting impression.
Exactly. Think about how often we use stories in everyday conversation. We share anecdotes, recount experiences, and use metaphors to make our points more vivid and memorable.
And it's not just in personal interactions. Stories are used everywhere, from advertising to politics to education. They're a universal language that transcends cultural boundaries.
You're absolutely right, and there's a reason for that. Our brains are wired for story. We're naturally drawn to narratives that have a beginning, middle, and end. Stories help us make sense of the world around us.
So how can we harness the power of storytelling for persuasion? What are some key principles to keep in mind?
Well, first and foremost, it's crucial to choose a story that resonates with your audience. What are their interests, values, and aspirations? What kind of narrative will capture their attention and evoke the emotions you're trying to elicit?
So it's not just about telling any old story. It's about finding the right story for the right audience.
Exactly. And once you've chosen your story, it's important to tell it in a way that is engaging, authentic, and emotionally compelling. Use vivid language, create suspense, and make your characters relatable.
It's like writing a novel or a screenplay. We want to create a story that people will want to hear, a story that will stay with them long after they've finished listening.
Precisely. And remember, the best stories are often those that are personal and relatable. Share your own experiences, your own struggles, and your own triumphs. People are more likely to connect with you and your message when they feel like they know you on a deeper level.
That's a great point. Vulnerability and authenticity can be incredibly powerful in storytelling.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to use humor, suspense, and other narrative techniques to make your stories more engaging and memorable.
So it's not just about delivering a dry recitation of facts. It's about creating an experience for the listener, something that will transport them to another world.
Exactly. Storytelling is an art form. And like any art form, it takes practice and refinement. But when done well, it can be an incredibly effective tool for persuasion.
This has given me a lot to think about. I'm starting to see how storytelling can be woven into so many different aspects of our lives.
And that's just one element of effective persuasion. There's so much more to explore. But for now, let's take a break and come back to uncover the fascinating world of nonverbal communication.
Sounds good to me. Stay tuned, everyone. The deep dive continues.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the world of persuasion.
We've covered so much ground already, from Cialdini's principles to the art of storytelling.
But we've saved one of the most fascinating aspects for last.
That's right. The often overlooked but incredibly powerful realm of nonverbal communication. Because it's not just what you say, it's how you say it right. Our body language, facial expressions, even our tone of voice can convey so much, often without us even realizing it.
You know, think about it this way. You can often tell if someone is genuinely interested in what you're saying just by observing them. Their eye contact, posture, the way they respond to you, It all adds up to a nonverbal message.
Yeah, you're right. You can practically feel the energy shift when someone's truly engaged in a conversation versus when they're just trying to be polite.
Exactly. And these nonverbal cues play a huge role in persuasion. They can either reinforce our words, making us more convincing, or they can completely undermine our message, making us appear untrustworthy or insincere.
So how do we make sure our nonverbal communication is working for us, not against us?
Well, let's start with eye contact. It's one of the most powerful nonverbal cues we have. Maintaining good eye contact demonstrates confidence, trustworthiness, and engagement.
But there's a fine line between good eye contact and staring someone down, right?
Absolutely. You don't want to make someone feel uncomfortable, but you also don't want to appear shifty or avoidant. It's about finding that natural balance, that sweet spot where you're connecting with the other person without overwhelming them.
Okay, so eye contact is key. What about posture? How does that factor into nonverbal communication?
Posture is all about conveying confidence and presence. Standing or sitting up straight suggests that you're engaged and in control. It projects an air of authority.
I can see how slouching or hunching over would have the opposite effect. It might make you seem insecure or uninterested.
Precisely. Even subtle adjustments to your posture can make a big difference. For example, leaning in slightly when someone is speaking shows that you're actively listening and interested in what they have to say.
Yeah, it's like you're physically drawing yourself closer to the conversation.
Exactly. And mirroring the other person's posture can help create a sense of rapport and connection. Subtly, of course.
Interesting. So if someone's leaning back in their chair, I might subtly lean back as well to create that sense of harmony.
Precisely. It's about finding that subtle synchronicity that helps build a connection.
Okay, so we've talked about eye contact and posture. What about facial expressions? I imagine those play a huge role in nonverbal communication.
Oh, our faces are incredibly expressive. A genuine smile can convey warmth, openness, and trustworthiness.
But a fake smile is pretty easy to spot, isn't it? You can kind of tell when someone's just forcing it.
Absolutely. Authenticity is key. People can sense when your expressions aren't genuine.
So no plastered-on smiles or forced grins.
Exactly. And remember, facial expressions are about more than just smiling. Pay attention to your eyebrows, your forehead, even the way you hold your mouth. All of these subtle movements contribute to the overall message you're sending.
This makes me think about the importance of tone of voice. You can say the exact same words, but depending on your tone, they can have completely different meanings.
You're absolutely right. Tone of voice is crucial. A sarcastic tone, for example, can completely undermine even the most sincere message.
Yeah, or if you're speaking in a monotone, it can make you sound bored or disengaged, even if you're actually interested in what you're talking about.
Precisely. Vary your tone, use inflection,
Yeah.
and inject emotion into your voice to keep people engaged and interested.
Okay, so tone of voice matters. What about hand gestures? Do those play a role in nonverbal communication as well?
Absolutely. Hand gestures can either add emphasis to your words or be incredibly distracting.
Like when someone's constantly fidgeting or waving their hands around, it can be hard to focus on what they're saying.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, using gestures to enhance your communication, not detract from it.
So it's like a dance between our words and our body language. When they're in sync, we become more persuasive communicators.
That's a great way to put it. And just like in dance, it takes practice to master these nonverbal cues.
What about people who are naturally less expressive? Can they still be persuasive, even if they're not the most outgoing or charismatic people in the room?
Absolutely. Remember, authenticity is key. It's not about trying to be someone you're not. It's about finding what feels natural for you and using those nonverbal cues to your advantage.
So even if I'm not a big hand talker, I can still be persuasive by making eye contact, maintaining good posture, and using my tone of voice effectively.
Exactly. And remember, nonverbal communication is a two-way street. It's not just about how you're presenting yourself, but also about how you're reading the other person.
So I should be paying attention to their body language, their facial expressions, their tone of voice, to get a sense of how they're receiving my message.
Precisely. It's about being present, being observant, and being responsive to the other person's cues.
It's like a tennis match. You're serving and volleying and adapting to each other's moves.
That's a great analogy. And just like in tennis, the more you practice, the better you'll become at both sending and receiving these nonverbal signals.
This has been incredibly insightful. It's amazing how much we communicate without ever saying a word.
And it's something we encounter every day in every interaction. By becoming more aware of these nonverbal cues, we can become more effective communicators and more persuasive individuals.
Well, you've certainly opened our eyes to a whole new dimension of persuasion. It's like a secret language we're all speaking, but now we're starting to understand the grammar.
And that understanding is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
It allows us to connect with others on a deeper level, build trust, and influence outcomes in a more meaningful way.
So the next time you're trying to persuade someone, remember to pay attention to your body language, your tone of voice, your facial expressions. They might be speaking louder than your words.
And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the fascinating world of persuasion. We've covered a lot of ground, from the psychology of influence to the power of nonverbal communication. But remember, this is just the beginning of your journey.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep practicing, and use this knowledge to become more effective and ethical communicators.
Because persuasion is a powerful tool, and in the right hands, it can be used to create positive change in the world.
So go out there and use your newfound knowledge wisely.
Understanding these persuasive techniques isn't just about becoming more aware of how we're influenced. It's about gaining the tools to be more intentional and ethical in how we communicate and connect with others. If you found today's exploration of the psychology of persuasion insightful, be sure to subscribe to Cognitive Curves for more deep dives into the human mind. And as always, we love hearing from you. So drop a comment with your thoughts or share how these techniques show up in your life. Stay curious, stay thoughtful, and keep exploring those cognitive curves.